Well, hello everybody, and I hope you had a great lunch and got to visit some exhibits. This is Rebecca Samulski again with Fire Adapted Colorado, and I'm excited to have folks joining me for the Community Wildfire Protection Planning Strategy session. I know folks are just starting to wander back in after lunch, but it looks like we have some good attendance and everything's going through. So I'm glad. I think we've figured out our tech challenges. So thank you for being here. We're going to go over a little bit of background here in a minute. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Beveridge, who is the Wildfire Mitigation Program Specialist for the Colorado State Forest Service, to give us some background on why we're talking about community wildfire protection plans this afternoon. One of our goals for the Colorado Wildland Fire Conference, while we have so many incredible leaders in wildfire preparedness from around the state together, is to make sure that in addition to sharing learning, we're also taking this time to get your input on things that we might want input on at a statewide level, and to be able to bounce ideas and brainstorm together. So that's what we're going to do today, a little bit around community wildfire protection plans. We want to explore how to make our plans more functional and updatable. We're going to talk a little bit after we get some background from Daniel. Then we're going to go into some breakout sessions. In the first couple of breakout sessions, we're going to look at how functional are our community wildfire protection plans right now, and how can we improve the impact of Cwpps in Colorado after that for the next couple of sessions. So this will be interactive. Please be prepared to be fully engaged for the next hour and a half, and to be able to get in even to your discussion forum. Probably what you will need to find your Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen, so you can unmute and mute yourself, turn on your video, turn it off for now, but turn on your video when you get into those groups. I'm going to just test out polling because I haven't gotten to try this yet today. So I'm going to start our first poll and ask you guys if you've been involved in the Cwpp primarily as, and let's see how this poll works. Testing. All right, this is a little bit of a cheat, but Cwpp is a community wildfire protection plan, and I think some of Daniel's background will tell you a little bit more about why those are important. And it's really great to have a few people too who have not been as engaged in them in the past, because those fresh perspectives are also really helpful to these conversations. So. Quite a few of you who've been really engaged. I'm going to give it just some of you are still thinking about it. We'll give it another minute. I'm going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, somebody got one in at the last minute. Okay, good job. I don't know what it looks like when I share results, but I think I'm sharing results with you. And then just one more quick question for you. This is with regards to the Colorado State Forest Service's template to help develop community wildfire protection plans. I think this is something that the State Forest Service would like to consider. Is this something that they should take a closer look at and update? And so to that effect, we want to know how you've used that template in the past. So I've got another poll running here. And we will certainly share that template with you at some point when I get a chance here in the chat, but we'll get a sense of how useful it is too before you can get a sense from others of how useful it is before you commit to diving into a Cwpp with that template. Okay, I'm just going to give about 5 more seconds. 2, 1, okay. So thank you guys so much for giving us that background on who's participating today. And I'm going to turn it over to our Wildfire Mitigation Program Specialist from the Colorado State Forest Service, Daniel Beveridge, to provide us a little bit more background.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for participating today. It looks like we have nearly 50 participants, and that's really exciting. Becca and I have been talking about assembling a session like this for some time, probably the better part of the year, if not longer. But just as she said, I just want to reiterate the fact that it's a really great opportunity for us to take advantage of the Wildfire Conference. And although we all wanted to be together in person, this is the next best thing. So thank you all for taking the time that wasn't necessary to participate in this afternoon's session, but we really are appreciative of the time you're taking to be involved in this brainstorming. So Becca and I assembled, some variety of topics that we wanted to cover here, but what I wanted to make sure that we did is just give a brief rundown from my perspective about Cwpps, what they are, what we have in the state, this and that. So I'll try not to take up too much of the time here because the greatest asset we have is everybody's ability to contribute. So when it comes to Cwpps, in my own words, I consider them to be a planning document that gathers broad stakeholders in the community together to assess wildfire risk and collectively develop solutions to vulnerabilities before, during, and after wildfires, okay? So according to a National Association of State Foresters definition on a briefing paper from back in 2005, they considered Cwpps to represent the best opportunity we have to address the challenges of the WUI in a way that brings about comprehensive and locally supported solutions. Now, thinking about this in a modern fashion, they may not necessarily be the best opportunity that we have, but they still are a very much valid and viable opportunity that is presented to us. Three key concepts that need to be addressed in a Cwpp are collaborative spirit, prioritization of fuel reduction, and the treatment of structural ignitability. Also, according to that primary planning document that I referenced. We can also provide that if anybody wants access to it at the end. How many Cwpps exist in Colorado? Becca, this may have been a good question for us to ask people to estimate at the outset, but we have 242 at the present time. At three different scales, really. 144 of them are local, down to the neighborhood or owners association level. There are 50 at the county level presently, and 48 associated directly with fire agencies and their jurisdictional boundaries, in essence. The scaling concept, what we do in Colorado is somewhat unique according to at least some other Western states. Certain Western states only have Cwpps at the county level. In Colorado, that is not a requirement that we have. We allow them to be significantly scalable, and that can be a blessing and a curse, you might say. But we do have them at all those scales that I mentioned, and they can be appropriately effective for different communities and different regions of the state, as seen fit by the folks that intend to develop them. When it comes to the state of planning, really kind of research status, what kind of efforts have been put forth to study how Cwpps are effective or ineffective or could be improved? In 2016, a research report was produced by Courtney Peterson, who used to work with the Colorado State Forest Service and is now associated with Colorado State University in a different capacity, along with a few other professors within the Human Dimensions and Natural Resources program at the university. It did a scientific analysis, a statistical analysis of the 212 Cwpps that existed in the state at that time in order to learn just that, how they were working, how they were effective, how could they be improved. There were numerous recommendations and lessons learned consolidated by categories in the culminating section of that document related to planning, implementation, challenges to community involvement, what successes there were, how to shift beyond the focus on fuels mitigation exclusively, as a lot of plans do, and how to effectively update those plans. The conclusions were conveyed pretty effectively in the summary, I think. Flexibility of these plans can be a barrier, for some types as they're delivered, and this is particularly for locally oriented plans. If there's not very clear purpose of the plans, the ability to utilize them, to implement them, and exactly which audience is being addressed. If that clarity doesn't exist, it's very hard for the documents to be viable and valid and to serve the purposes intended. As y'all may expect and likely have experienced, both funding and limited time of the folks that are affected or incorporated into the plan are very, very significant barriers. One of the solutions to that is providing some very clear focus at the outset. Overall main challenges for underlying themes for basically all the plans. Community involvement issues, internal communications amongst not only the folks to be supported by the plan's efforts, but also the key players or the core folks that are involved. And then full participation across the community in a general sense. An increased focus on other areas can benefit certain plans. There wasn't very much address of certain things that are becoming much more relevant in the present day, post-fire concerns, evacuation issues, and then other general preparedness concepts. And then the final conclusion from that report was that these plans can become rapidly outdated, and I would trust that a lot of you have some personal experience with this. Interesting notes here, as of earlier this year, February of 2020, 85% of our CWPPs are more than 5 years old, and almost 50% are greater than 10 years old. There are a lot of reasons to update these plans: community turnover, changes in community structure, the evaluation of the risk has been modified or changed, and improvements in technology, general improvements in technology. It's good to know that in 2019, a similar analysis was completed by the Ecological Restoration Institute in Flagstaff, Arizona, hosted by Northern Arizona University. And I was very pleased to find that they had echoed a lot of these same findings. They were concentrating primarily on plans in Arizona, but they did do an assessment at a broader scale of Western state CWPPs in a general sense. One of the most highly cited benefits that they found in that study was that just the pure nature of the collaborative process can sometimes be more effective as an ultimate outcome compared to the plan itself. We have a lot of support resources that exist. The template was mentioned already. We have minimum standards that are associated or embedded with that template on behalf of the State Forest Service. We have access to every state CWPP that exists in the state on the agency's website. There are numerous guides that exist. One that was just released in 2020 on behalf of FEMA and the U.S. Fire Administration. And then we have access to a lot of learning network tools, for example, Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, and then of course, FACO as a group, Fire Adapted Colorado, that is, for anybody newer to the area. The needs that I want to get out of this, and Becca and the rest of Fire Adapted Colorado will be clarified as we get into the exercises, so I won't hit on those too much to any specific extent, because I feel like I'm running a little bit over here, but there's numerous opportunities for when it comes to updating these plans for those of you that already have them in place. That does not need to include a full rewrite of the plan. Simple tasks can really go a long way. Are the appropriate partners still engaged that were there at the outset when the plan was first written? Is the boundary still valid for the plan that exists? One of the critical things to consider when these updates are done is documenting accomplishments that have occurred. Are there demographic changes in the community? The list goes on and on. There are opportunities to integrate these plans with others that can be really effective and productive. And reaching out to find other examples that have been successful, not only in our local areas within the state of Colorado, certainly outside of our boundaries. We have access to a lot of those resources, and I'm glad y'all are here to help us look into some of this so that we can move forward with making CWPPs more modernized in the state of Colorado and as useful as they possibly can be.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel. That's huge. And I was super excited here to be thinking that I was going to put you guys into breakout rooms, and there's only like 3 of you who would actually be able to get into those breakout rooms. So so that's not going to work. So we're going to do this a little bit differently, but maybe it'll be more smooth than trying to leave into breakout rooms and come back. So the first thing that, the first question that we have for you, I'm going to drop it in the chat, but it might have some extraneous info. We want to know what successes can be attributed to community wildfire protection plans. So I'm just going to let you each, on your own, please take a minute, get some scrap paper, and or start typing it in the chat box, because that's where we're ultimately going to put this. Some successes that you've had with that you attribute to your community wildfire protection plans. Like, are local leaders using them to plan risk reduction work? Have they been used to get grant funding or to guide planning? What success stories can you share relating to community involvement with the development or the implementation of these plans? So just take a couple of minutes to put your success stories into the chat box. We were going to have more time to discuss these as little breakouts, but we'll just have to discuss them as a whole. I'll pull out some that I really like from the chat. The discussion forum is the best place to put those. And I will throw out there, since we have a little bit more flexibility as the large group, if anybody has a specific example they really want to share that's just, you know, in less 30 seconds to a minute, you can unmute yourself and share with us via audio as well. That's okay, Steve Croker, that you've only done CWPPs in the training class. However, I know that there will be successes that come from your mapping work in those plans in the future. And if you've already put one in here, please look at some of the other ones from other folks and see if there's one that you really, really like or you want to know something more about. Okay, we're still definitely getting a few. Some of you could probably write books about your successes with CWPPs, and you may be doing that right now. So we really appreciate those stories. Thank you. I am going to ask a tech question, because somehow Bill Link and Katie Lighthall were able to get into a place where I can put you into breakout rooms. I'm curious if you guys had to do something special when you joined the session. Or Melinda and Daniel Bowker, if any of you did anything.
Hey, Becca, it's Katie.
Yeah, what did you do?
When I clicked on, the Join Now session, it gave me a little blurb that said the computer audio is not supported by my browser. It said click on the launch the Zoom app. So I did, and there you are.
So you folks had to do the workaround and come in through Zoom, and that's why I'm seeing you. And that's apparently the breakout function isn't supported through on air. Okay, well, I'm not going to make you all leave and come back because I might lose some of you. So, but mystery solved. Thank you. It's good to know for future reference. These are some great stories, great successes, and it really points out, you know, for the one or two of you who haven't been involved in community wildfire protection plans in the past, this really points out what an important tool they are for planning and how valuable they can be in communities. And I really wanted to start on that positive note because we know that a lot of great work has gotten done because of them. My second question that we're going to explore in a similar way, but I'm going to put a link for some slides for you, is we're going to explore the question, what makes CWPPs successful or not? Some of the things to consider are the scale of the plan, the process and who is involved in it. Are the champions still in the community who helped to write that plan? Is the plan up to date? So I have some of these questions on some slides. I'm going to get you the link in un momento. And what I would like for you to do when you get this link to go into slides is I would like for you to duplicate that first slide and put your name at the top. We were going to have team names. If you want to have your own, you know, personal team bill, that's fine. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to discuss very well. Actually, we can try unmuting, but it'll get messy. So add your thoughts. I just dropped that. Well, no, it didn't drop the link. It just dropped part of it. Un momento. So the question is going to be, what makes CWPPs successful or not? So think about that in your head right now when you think about those successes that you've had while I'm getting this dropped into the chat. Okay, so please go ahead and pop that into a different space. Bear with my tech fun here, trying to do fancy things. It should look a lot like this. A lot of you are getting in there, it looks like. Before you start typing in there, please make sure to just right-click on it and make a duplicate and get your name in there. Somebody else's name is on it. Try to type in one that's got your name on it. Once you get in there, it shouldn't pop around like it does on other Google Docs. You should be able to just work on your side, and it's looking like that's working pretty well. So toss your name in there. What makes CWPP successful or not? There has been a bit of research on this, and we're really curious, I think, whether or not, to what extent you confirm that. We can make generalizations about more specific plans or more localized geographic area plans being successful or more successful, but at the same time, we certainly have examples of very successful CWPPs at all scales. All right, looks like you guys are getting slides figured out and starting to fill them in. So I'm going to give you some serious time to think about this, like at least 5 minutes. But if something pops into somebody's mind that you would like to unmute and share, or Daniel, if you see anything as people are sharing things that you would like to call out, we will have a little bit of dialogue in the background. I like how some of you gravitate to the success and others maybe have a little bit more in the collecting dust column. I'm going to give you guys about 3 more minutes to work on this because this is really helpful framing. And Daniel, feel free to chime in if you think we need more or less. It seems like people are still having a lot of ideas to get down here.
I think this is good. Becca, I'd go ahead and stick to the time frame that you're thinking of, and then as folks have time to continue to populate these, whether it's during the session or afterwards, and we can still pull them when the time comes, as long as that access will be viable.
I'm a little bit bummed that you guys, the benefit, of course, of working in the little smaller groups together is you get to kind of sort through and find some of your commonalities and kind of come back with a cohesive, these are our successes and the things that have not been as successful. So this will be a little bit more work on the back end to try to sort that.
So it goes.
And if you feel like you're getting to a stopping place with some of your thoughts, please do go in and peruse and look at what some other folks are saying. Come on, Meg. I know that you can come up with, think about some CWPPs collecting dust somewhere. Yeah, I think you could probably go through here and you'll find on all the contractors that they just have the list of what makes theirs successful all the time. We go find Vicky Amato's and see if hers is the same.
Becca, I wrote down a bunch, but then it wouldn't save it under the collecting dust. Yeah.
Well, that's weird. I just thought I'd call you out on that, but it's another tech failure. Okay. Please go ahead and still spend a few more minutes on that. But if you're getting to a point where you feel like you're starting to exhaust it, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll that's related to these. Feel free to look through other people's to help answer this poll question. Just going to ask over in your on-air window, what geographic scope of CWPPs do you think is most effective? And I'm going to test the poll and see if I can keep it open and have the results sharing as they update. I think I can do that. It's a really great point about evacuations. It's something that I don't believe is really addressed right now in the template, and it's a very challenging thing to do around evacuation planning and egress routes. And so great point about how necessary and important this is, but the challenge of effectively integrating that into your planning. Just Daniel, when you and I were working on these poll questions, as far as the scale, do you know of any other scale of CWPPs besides county, fire district, neighborhood?
I do have some experience, Becca, that kind of blends some of those categories together. You know, some that are a fire agency that crosses multiple county boundaries, for example. You know, regions of certain areas, but no like formal definitions other than, you know, local county and fire agency. No, I personally am not familiar.
Those are definitely the most common. Maybe are there any municipal level ones? Like Boulder or Colorado Springs. I wonder if they have their own CWPPs or if it's more probably the fire district level in that case.
Generally, that's the case, yeah.
Just going to give you another minute to wrap up this piece and find your way over to that poll. I think only less than half of you have made your way there. So once I'm seeing a little bit more activity on the poll, I will know that we can move on to the next item. Okay, so please don't close out of this other screen. Stay with me in both places, on Events Air as well as in your slideshow that you found here. And we're going to shift the conversation from kind of the current state of CWPPs and what makes them effective or not, to how we can improve the impact of community wildfire protection plans in Colorado. We're going to do this in a series of questions and answers, and I will have each of these questions. I think I'm going to have to work with my tech guy, Eric Simmons, in the other room to help get these questions out to you guys so you don't get them all flying at you at once. So we should have 6 or 7 minutes of questions, since I'm starting a little bit early on this part. And I'll drop in a new question in every 6 minutes or so. Let's see. So do make sure that you have Events Air up somewhere so that you can get the little messages at the top. I think that's going to be the best way for me to share questions with you as they get added. It's okay if you really get going on one and you want to skip to one down the line if you really have a lot to say about one of these questions. And I'm not going to give it all away right up front. So the first question I am going to give away, we're going to use this slide same way that we just did. We're going to use this gray slide down between the red slides and duplicate that. And don't worry about all the instruction that really had to do with breakouts. We will just delete that part and make space for you. Okay. To answer, how do you know it's time to write, update, or dust off your community wildfire protection plan? How do you know that it's time to get going again, to use this plan, to rewrite your plan, to update your plan, to write one in the first place? So that is our first question. And we'll take till about 1:45 to work on that question. Please duplicate the slide and throw your name on there if you can, so that we're not all answering in the same one. Great, see some of you getting in there, getting some pages duplicated. Thank you so much. It's easier that way than doing a spreadsheet or a running document where somebody types above you and you end up losing your space on the page. So hopefully this will be a useful tool for gathering your input. And Jessica, I can see that we have some answers going in the discussion forum too, from folks who are having challenges getting into the slides. So I apologize for getting myself super slide focused. Jessica, I will drop the link in case that's part of the problem, is just finding that. But yeah, please you can, if you can unmute yourself, you're also welcome to share some things verbally, and I'll start a slide and capture them on it. Oh, didn't like that format.
Yeah, Becca, this is Bill. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I've given up on the slide thing. I don't know what's going on with that. But what I've seen be successful is it does help bring the community together. And the biggest thing is it's an incentive for grants. And it's because it's mandatory or, definitely needed on a lot of them. The biggest problems I've seen with them collecting dust is at a county level, nobody looks at it afterwards in most of our rural counties. On a subdivision level, the smaller levels, it's kind of the same thing. If the original champions aren't there anymore, it doesn't get looked at. So if you could add that in someplace, I'm still trying to figure out how to duplicate a slide and not just keep writing on top of others.
Hopefully those others don't mind too much. You can also, I know some people just do new slides as well, and it may just be a system thing. I know that you operate on some fun systems there, Bill, so for me, I could just right click and duplicate a slide, but if that's not working for you, feel free to speak up and I'll capture it in other ways. And so I'm capturing that now, and then the next question for those of you who are struggling with the slides is, how do you know it's time to write, update, or dust off a community wildfire protection plan?
This is Meg. I wanted to kind of respond to what Bill said, because I thought, like, he brought up a really good point, and I don't have an answer to it, but it's something I've thought about a lot. Is we've worked with fire protection districts, and when we mention that their county also has a CWPP, they're either like, oh, I didn't know that, or they're like, well, this is completely separate from that. So and then some of the communities also have neighborhood CWPPs within them, but the timing of when these are developed is like asynchronous. So I struggle to figure out across the different scales. It seems like connecting them would create better outcomes, but I'd be interested if anybody else has come up with a good way to do that, to connect across the different scales, kind of like tier them to each other.
So Eagle County is a real good example of an area that has every level of CWPPs from an HOA level on up to the countywide plan. And that every time that, a plan is written, updated, whatever, that's a discussion that always occurs. And, what has happened here is the county plan focuses on kind of the big picture, more generalized information. And then as the scale of the CWPP decreases, the level of specificity increases. So some of those, neighborhood or HOA level plans are fairly specific in terms of project area boundaries and prescriptions and that kind of stuff. And, that seems to work, I guess, as good as I've seen anywhere.
Thanks, Paul. How about, is there ever if there's some inconsistencies between what a neighborhood wants to do and some of the priorities at the county level? Like, how does that conversation then happen?
Well, there's definitely differences in priorities. The HOA has their own internal priorities, and where a project ranks out countywide. It may be the highest priority in the community, but it's relatively low at the HOA level. I think what's been successful here is that, everybody's, really involved in, all the levels that they need to be. So, Eric Lovegren is the county wildfire person has been involved in the development of all of the plans. And so, that provides a level of consistency. And, honestly, I think it's really good that each plan has their own, priorities. There are some cases where there can be competition for funding, but, again, through good collaborative processes, sometimes we'll apply for, grants across multiple different jurisdictions, which sometimes ends up being a more favorable grant application anyways.
Awesome. Those are some really good nuggets. Especially having similar people involved in all the efforts. I like that.
I don't know how visible these are. Yes, thank you guys so much for chiming in. And I want to drop the second question to get you guys thinking, progressing on this thought process. So when you know it's time, okay, well, how do you contribute effectively to implementing projects from CWPPs? This can be you individually or your group or agency or CWPP team. So how do you move it towards that success side of the spectrum with your CWPPs? I've heard little pieces of that just in what Paul was saying about having the team who's working on it together and everybody engaged at the right levels to make that work. So yeah, you can grab the question from my slide 19 and pop it on the slide that you are already on, or you can just look at it and put down the number 2 on the slide that you are already working on, and hopefully you can see that in the screen share for a little bit in the on-air space as well. I know we're having a few folks who are struggling with the tech, but I think by and large it's working pretty well. And I'll just point out, I just went ahead and closed the geographic scope of CWPPs. So I don't know how front and center that is on your screen, guys. It looks really different on our back end. But it was balanced out with the fire districts for a while, and then the neighborhoods pulled ahead towards the end there. So this is really thinking about the behaviors of the people in your community that are leading to the success of the CWPPs, the successes that you've talked about. What are the behaviors that you demonstrate, or that other partners of yours demonstrate, that make these CWPPs effective? We know that it really comes back to the people. People make things happen. Anybody who's having a challenging time on the with the slides want to chime in on how you contribute effectively to implementing projects from the CWPPs?
Yeah, this is Bill again, who's technically challenged here or something. Even with Microsoft 10, I can't work this thing. Yeah, one of the things that I've found that's really important is you do need some leaders involved there who know when it's time to start implementing things, whether that's coming from within the CWPP area or from somebody else who's aware of grant opportunities and is aware of the various CWPPs in their area and can get word out to people. It's some sort of networking and coordination seems to be crucial there, or else nothing really happens.
Yeah. You almost had a poll on we kind of have this question, it feels rhetorical sometimes, as to who should lead these, who are the lead implementers. And I know that I've seen plenty of CWPPs fall down because well, we've got to do this to be eligible for money, and then you lose your champion, or there never really was one to begin with. And yeah, you got to have that leader to bring people together and say, let's work on this project. Here's an opportunity to go after it. So that's great. Thank you, Bill. There's some great comments in the chat too that I'm struggling to keep up with. We are going to be without tech support for 5 minutes, so don't do anything crazy. Well, we've got Wendy on the other end. We should be okay. Daniel, are you able to keep up at all on the discussion forum better than I am?
I can sure try, Becca. I'm bouncing back and forth, but if you'd like me to keep eyes on that.
I've been probably not getting as much out of that as he could, so if you want to chime in on anything that stands out to you there, that would be great.
Sure.
And we do have, I said there were 7 questions, so I'm going to get the next one up here to keep things moving. And this is just building on what those effective things are that you can do. What keeps you from doing that all the time, or what keeps your team from doing that all the time, from implementing these projects? So what prevents you from contributing effectively or implementing your CWP projects all the time? And many of you are copying it to your pages, which is fantastic. You can also just drop the number 3 there and know what that question is.
Becca, in the discussion there, sorry, go ahead. In the discussion, there's some talk about terminology and unification of terms, and there's been a good point brought up here by Steve, or that NFPA had done a fair amount of research in Firewise sites across the country to gather input from community members about what terms they liked or disliked, and NFPA did that as an exercise. That was, I suppose, maybe 3 to 5 years ago. I'm not exactly sure, but it was one of the primary reasons why they changed the name of the program from Firewise Communities to Firewise USA, and now they're called sites. They're not called communities, and so on and so forth. And this idea between, assessment as opposed to, what was the other term, Becca, that's most commonly used when it comes to? Inspection. Yeah, yes, correct.
Assessment or inspection,
right.
About the site visit, or.
Yeah, because assessment was related to a negative financial implication, is kind of what a lot of people thought of immediately when the term assessment was brought up. But Steve says mitigation sounded too much like litigation. Yeah, I can understand that is could be a matter of confusion, but we, as an organization, we've been working on updating our home ignition zone guideline, our 2012-1 document, and a lot of these questions certainly have come up. The idea between using defensible space as opposed to survivable space, and so on. But I'm curious from the group as a whole, do any of you have any very strong concerns about certain types of terminology? Steve, I'm pretty familiar with your take on this, but for anybody else, a lot of times one of the things that I find fruitful is, particularly with groups like NFPA, when they have a necessary obligation to tailor their programs to a nationwide audience. I think there's a lot of benefit to be gained in that, because with the research that they do, they're very, very strong perspective. Any groups that have uniformity in terminology that I think are inappropriate to have source of information to give to.
Hey, Daniel, will you unmute? Yeah, unmute yourself. We were getting background, and I don't think it was from you. Sorry.
Hey, Daniel, just to give you a little view from my view, I agree that some of the terminology we use doesn't necessarily fit in well with the general public, but I think it's also a bit on us to educate the public a bit on terminology. When you think about a term such as social distancing, up until 8 months ago, right, or 6 months ago, nobody outside of epidemiology knew what the term social distancing meant. And now, my wife's kindergartners could tell you what social distancing means. So I think a bit of it is also upon us to, clarify the terminology that we use, and use it properly.
I certainly agree, Paul. And, this is one of those kind of unique benefits. Although we would all like to be in person together, having this conversation in the same room here and now, we find ourselves in this situation in which we can, in some ways, reach a much broader audience, though not in the same kind of, personal means by which we'd like to. With that said, I myself have been involved in a number of larger scale webinars that have been recorded and replicated, and one in particular was a Colorado Division of Insurance webinar that happened a couple weeks ago. And to another one of Steve Orr's points that was brought up earlier, this concept of the home ignition zone, in order for us to do a more effective job moving forward of appreciating the idea that structure's likelihood of igniting is related very much to the condition and the nature of the home and the construction and so on, as well as the vegetation management or defensible space or condition of the fuels that are adjacent to the structure, comprising this idea of the home ignition zone. I on behalf of the State Forest Service, am working to convey that message more clearly, because I will admit that in the past, the organization really concentrated on one of those topics much more than the other, defensible space as opposed to home hardening or reducing structural ignitability. So that is something that we're working on. And, we can't please everybody with the terms that we choose to use, but we also have to recognize that abandoning a concept that people are very familiar with could have additional implications that are unwelcome.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Really good discussion. And we've got about a half hour left, so I do want to make sure that I get all these questions up there. But were there any other pieces on, something that directly keeps you from contributing effectively, and from doing the things that you think need to be done to implement Cwpps? Or maybe it's something else in your community that's preventing Cwpps from getting worked on as effectively as you know that they can be. Were there any, I want to bring this back because these questions are going to keep building on each other, so I want to get our minds back in that a little bit as well. I might pull from some slides a little bit here on thoughts. Time and money. If any of you didn't put time and money, I should have said no time and money. It doesn't count. Just kidding. Yeah, that's huge. Getting community buy-in for the projects that aren't the easiest projects, right? There's a lot. That's a great one. We always kind of start out and maybe cherry pick those projects that are easy to take on, right? And how you keep moving and removing the barriers to those projects that you know are really high priority projects, but are maybe for one reason or another challenging to implement. How can you weigh one risk with the other? Thinking back to a risk-based decision-making conversation this morning. Actual project implementation barriers with litigation or lack of agency resources for NEPA. Yeah, great. So I'm going to drop you the fourth question in here in just a minute, which is, do you know anybody who's able to frequently implement their projects, and what behaviors do they do or practices do they do that has made their success possible? And maybe this is you, but what is it about the way that you're working that is helping you to overcome those barriers and get those projects implemented from the CWPP on an ongoing basis? This is working fairly well. I'm really pleased with you guys' ability to stick in there. And I know some of you are still struggling with the slides, or I haven't had access to the slides. So, so if there's anything now thinking on the positive side of people who really are regularly able to implement CWPP projects, or take that off the shelf and get those projects into planning stage and all the way through to implementation, what are they doing maybe differently? Anybody wants to unmute and chime in, you're welcome to as well.
This is Jim Webster from Boulder County. I'll speak a little bit for Abby Silver with the Sunshine Fire Protection District. She also works for Boulder County, but Sunshine imposed a local tax for mitigation and CWPP activities. So they have an annual source of revenue to implement projects. So they're implementing projects every year and have regular programs because they're not dependent on solely grant-funded applications. You know, if we're all competing for grant funds and severance taxes go down because oil and gas revenues go down, that grant funding dries up and we can't get as many projects done. So having a local funding source to implement CWPP activities means there's always activity. So Abby Silver with Sunshine's been very effective on that. And at the county level here in Boulder County, you know, we're focusing on home ignition zone work because homeowners can fund that work and do that work every year. Even if we don't have grant funding, we have grant funding some years. So, you know, the idea of just focusing on projects that need grant funding creates some challenges or barriers if that grant funding isn't available. So having local funding sources. We tried in Boulder County to have a CWPP tax that failed. I mean, Sunshine was successful, but having local funding really helps.
Jim, is that Sunshine tax a property tax?
Yes.
This is Abby, and I can just jump in and, oh, sorry, I've got too many.
We can hear you.
Really, am I echoing?
No.
No, you're good, Abby.
Oh, I am on my end. Okay, it's a mill levy.
Okay.
And just to piggyback on what Jim said, I think the other foundation of success in Sunshine is that we have like retired people who are willing to take leadership and they just have the time to deal with it.
And I bet a lot of them lived through the 4 Mile Fire.
Yes.
So that is huge too. So are you actually getting in that case? Yeah, great point about the fire at your back door, but to motivate people. But in this case, in the Sunshine Fire District, are property owner groups then coming to you? You know, local Firewise type leaders coming to you and saying, we want to do a project from our plan, and do you have the funding to help, or how is that? Can you tell me us a little more?
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry. I'm getting so much echo on my end. It's a little distracting to talk, but our fire district is very small. There's only like 150 homes, but we do get groups of people coming and suggesting projects that are specific to like their shared driveways or small cluster.
Okay.
I think another really good example is like Summit County. If you look at the successes that Summit County's had, you know, like Sunshine, they have a stable local funding source. They have a well-established fire council, which is really focused on solely implementing the CWPP. You know, they have pretty significant community buy-in, and you know, over the years it kind of waxes and wanes based on, you know, when the most recent fire activity is, but you know, they're able to implement very large scale projects over a long duration, you know, really building upon their momentum.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Great example.
For Abby or Jim, if either of y'all are still available, this is great that, of course, that everybody on the call, if they weren't involved or familiar with this idea of local taxation in order to kind of insulate, just like Jim had mentioned, from the whimsical nature of grant availability. I'm curious, with that funding source, Jim, you had said something about how it is designated in some part to be directly linked to CWPP maintenance. Now, does the Sunshine Fire Protection District, just confirm for me if you would, if the CWPP that exists there is one that's local or one that's technically considered, you know, associated with a fire protection district? And regardless of what the answer is there a designated update interval of 5 years, for example?
Abby knows the detail on updating. They do update it, but yes, the tax is designated for CWPP activities. The county tax, we put a tax on the ballot and that failed. So we don't have a county-wide CWPP tax, just the Sunshine Fire District. Abby, are you on? It does get updated regularly. I don't know if it's exactly 5 years, but it's been updated a couple times.
I know she's experiencing a little bit of a challenge with the audio. It sounded like it may just be challenging to unmute, and with however her audio is set up.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I've got like this open on multiple screens because I'm having some tech issues, but yeah, we have updated it once after like 5 years, and we're definitely overdue and kind of working on updating it again.
updates, keep that in mind with this next question that I'm going to pop in here. I think that's definitely a part of this. Do you have any ideas to make CWPPs more successful? And I think most of your screens are probably getting pretty full, so I'm going to suggest I have another page down here in the by the ideas category that we can use to play around with for entering your thoughts here on the last 3 questions that we're going to have. So do you have any ideas to make CWPPs more successful? And I threw in here, in addition to your, your bright ideas about updating, about support at whatever level you think support to the CWPP scale would be helpful to make these happen. Put your big ideas, your small ideas in there. Duplicate your slide first, please. Duplicate and get one going for you. This stuff on the left is some ideas that have come up around modernizing the CWPPs and some things that we might want to integrate into an update of the template, for instance, or the update of the guidance as a state. And so please feel free to use that as well around your ideas if they relate to, for instance, updates and how to go about doing those. That's a whole nother area where, what are the key things we need to do? What tools and resources do you need? Or are there existing resources that you've found valuable towards integrating these items into your CWPPs? So give you a little bit more here to work with as far as framing what ideas you have. And we'll definitely have 6 or 7 minutes to keep working through this question.
Becca, this is Bill Tremarco. You mind if I state mine verbally here?
Please chime in. Let me make a copy so that I have a place to for people to add to that's not making a mess. Hold on. Yeah, go for it, Bill.
Yeah, I started to put some of this in the discussion forum, but it's probably buried in there by now. But I've actually been having a lot better success at a community level with the Firewise USA program than with CWPPs. And the biggest thing for a couple of reasons. One is the amount of work that goes into a CWPP to come up with pretty much the same information you can put together with a good community assessment, which brings in the same partners. It's just much simpler and easier. And the good thing that I've found with those Firewise USA recognition status is that they have to reapply every year. So on the CWPPs, most of them are on a 5 to 10 year update schedule. And especially in some of our rural areas here, like where I'm at, where we have a lot of second homes and people who come and move here and they're gone 3 years later, there isn't the continuity to get these projects done down the road. Whereas when they keep getting their annual reminders from NFPA, that seems to make a big difference. I think for myself, I've just about given up on CWPPs at a community level. The backlog to get them through the Colorado State Forest Service is ridiculous out here, mostly because we have a couple of fire chiefs that are trying to get them for every community in their district and telling people they have to have them. And it's putting such a backlog that any of us in other parts of that district we can't get through it. And I've given up. So I've been focusing on the Firewise USA community assessments. I think if we're going to use CWPPs, we should tie them in with those, because then somebody else is sending people that annual reminder that can keep this update process more fluid and alive instead of, I think we got a lot of dead documents out there collecting dust. I know there are some places where people are engaged and, are following through with this, but that has not been the case in a lot of areas in Southwest Colorado here. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Great. That's helpful. Great feedback to have as far as how that works. I think at the resident scale. So I know some I know early on when I was working with Firewise USA stuff and trying to get communities engaged, it seemed like there was this, people were thinking a CWPP, you had to go full blown CWPP in order to have your community assessment. And I think what you guys have done with Wildfire Adapted Partnership to dial it down to a simple, more simple community assessment process that doesn't necessarily have the end all be all 25-year plan of every action you could take in the community, but is more focused on what can you do in the next year or two with the key partners for their community has been, sounds like that's been very successful. There's a few comments in the discussion forum I want to highlight. Lucy Bauer was talking about including interactive links that allow readers to get to the different parts of the document more easily and find what they need. She suggests having some sort of a flow chart that's custom for the different stakeholders so that they can see clearly how they to navigate the CWPP and pull out the information that's relevant to them personally without having to wade through all the technical and less relevant information. So yeah, that's great, especially thinking about some of these broader scale CWPPs, maybe having something besides just a table of contents that really guides you, depending on your different role, to the right part of the plan for what you can do. It's a neat idea, Lucy. Steve's mentioning cross-boundary CWPPs that can cut down on unnecessary redundancy. I'm thinking, and that's coming probably from somewhat of a fire district perspective, where maybe you have a lot of the same issues from one fire district to the next, but yet you're all independently working on CWPPs. And it would also lead to some consistency in terminology and methodology. And you could increase funding through cross-boundary projects. So yeah, great feedback and input there.
Hey, Becca, it's Paul.
Yeah.
Just looking at some of the items listed here, evacuation planning, post-fire planning, all that other stuff. You know, I've seen all sorts of different stuff in my career in terms of how people put that into CWPPs, don't include that. I think they're all important components. However, you know, trying to stuff a community-specific evacuation plan into a CWPP tends to be pretty challenging. So one of the things that I've seen some communities do is, you know, referencing one document into another. You know, and particularly when you get to like the FEMA mitigation plans and all that other stuff, a lot of counties will point to their county CWPP in that section, but also in the CWPP point to the FEMA mitigation plan. You know, and again, when you tie a lot of documents together, you know, it can get confusing. But as long as, you know, people are cognizant of that as plans get updated, it tends to keep the CWPP at least a little more streamlined.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I think that's the idea of doing those referrals so that you don't have to have everything in one plan. Right, I talked about that a little bit this morning about how much some of these different plans can dovetail into each other. So you can have that as a separate evacuation plan referenced as it's created, and have the CWPP referenced in the natural hazard mitigation plan and so forth. So, and I think that drives that kind of the sixth question, which is what can be done to make it happen. So that's, you know, one idea to make CWPPs more successful. You don't have to put everything in them. You can link stuff, you can refer stuff. That would be one example. I did throw the sixth question up on the slide here. What can be done? What's your first step? Who can do it to make this happen? And I'm going to throw the seventh question on there too while we're at it, just so we have time, and that's so that we don't miss this one. Who else needs to weigh in on modernizing the CWPPs. We're a decent sized group here with a lot of experience, but who else in terms of specific individuals that you want to call out and make sure they get a chance to look at some of this and give their input, or kinds of groups of people who are maybe left out of the conversation today? So it's kind of moving on to the next step phase. Yeah, Steve.
Hi. Yeah, no, to Paul's point, which I think is a great point, and sort of ties in this question as well. We're in a county that is not particularly well engaged, as some of you may be familiar. So we understand that we need to stay in our lane, so to speak, and not try to accomplish too much in our CWPP. But at the same time, when it comes to things like evacuation specifically, we're kind of trying to take the approach of the tail wagging the dog to a certain extent when it comes to the county. Although ultimately, again, that's perhaps the responsibility of the sheriff's office, again, not getting much engagement from them or trying to just sort of fill that void, if you will. So, yeah, no, a really good point that there may be other plans, but, it depends on the municipality, it depends on the county you're in. Because again, one of our big challenges is the lack of engagement from the county. And so that's one of our big barriers that we're not going to wait until the county necessarily engages. So we're, again, trying to take a bit of a proactive approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's great. Daniel, is there anything? We only have a kind of about 7 minutes here to wrap up these last few questions, and please keep giving your input. I'll get it back to the slide where you can, where everybody who's maybe not seeing the screens can also see the rest of the questions. But I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on the input, Daniel, and next steps that we want to try and get from here, or that you want to get from people.
Yeah, well, Becca, I've been taking some notes here in my notebook, and there's too many additional thoughts to share with the limited time we have remaining. This is obviously the kind of thing that could have taken a full day or more, obviously. But I do want to back up just a little bit and express my appreciation to Paul for mentioning what he did and recognizing that just like Becca had mentioned this morning, tiering to other plans can be valuable for so many reasons. It can help to avoid reinvention of the wheel and so on. But I think that I'm fairly sure with what information I have now is emergency managers in each of our respective counties within the state have not been consulted when it comes to these plans as frequently as they could have been. And to use Paul's example, I feel like he had said this more or less directly, an emergency manager is likely going to have a lot of familiarity with ingress and egress routes for any sort of hazard that may occur. And it's important for everybody to recognize that every county in the state has a natural hazard mitigation plan. So the ability to link those or mesh those in any fashion is very important and valuable. But the first step really is to reach out to your emergency manager and to ensure that individual in your county is aware of the fact that you intend to undergo a CWPP update or development of a new plan. I think that has been a traditionally underutilized resource for a lot of reasons. There's a really significant wealth of information in those emergency managers' mind, and access to a whole nother set of networks that can support the kind of same goals that we have here with CWPPs. Not to mention the potential access to additional funding sources, which a lot of people consider to be kind of, gold mine's not an appropriate term, nor a silver bullet necessarily, but something that helps us to continue to move forward in a creative fashion. No, Becca, I don't really have anything else in a culminating sense other than appreciation that you're requesting that we ask the folks who are involved here who else we should bring to the table. I think the real work needs to happen, between you and I and whomever else will be responsible for distilling a lot of this information. But it's great to get it out and have these conversations. And it'll be a lot of work, but this is a great step forward. That's all I have for now.
I could really see as it's starting to, just in reading some of the responses, that there are a lot of commonalities and consistencies, and it's consistent with the research I think that Courtney had done in the past as well. So that's great. I think to a large degree we know what needs to be done, and there's a lot of great ideas here for moving the processes forward, and also thinking about and recognizing that CWPs aren't the end all be all for everything, but obviously from the success stories earlier, there is a lot of great work that can come out of working on these plans, especially when you really have a dedicated individual who's able to bring people together, or a dedicated team who's working on implementation of that plan at whatever level, that is really taking that where they're just created for other reasons to try to go after grant dollars, or you lost your champion in the community, then we see them sitting on shelves more. Steve, it's great to see. I saw you put in the chat that you've got your Jeffco OEM and the Fire Management Officer positions are both open right now. So shout out if anybody knows somebody who would be great for that. Send them to Jeffco's website or maybe Steve, you're planning on applying for one, in which case I'd be happy to write you a letter of recommendation. I also threw in the chat. It might be better coming from Beverage. I don't know. We'll get you that if you need it. I will, in the comment box, there have been a couple comments since then, but I did drop a note on with a link to a CWPP folder. So if you guys want to grab that before this cuts us off in a minute, there's not a whole lot in there. It's going straight into the back end of a FACO Google Drive folder on CWPPs, but it does have some resources we mentioned today. It has the research that Courtney did. It has the State Forest Services CWPP guidance, as well as the template in it. It also has a crosswalk document for integrating CWPPs with hazard mitigation plans. So it's got a few really good resources in there that if you haven't seen those things or you heard about them today, that's a place where you can grab those. I don't think I have like a template on community assessments in there right now, but that is a great tool. Firewise USA also kind of has their own tools around that to think about more at that neighborhood level. And Bill, do you think it would be all right, or if there's anybody else from WAP, do you think, would you guys be okay with me including your community assessment template in that folder to share with folks as an example?
Yeah, I'll send you we have an updated one.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Send me an updated one so I'm not sharing one from 3 years ago. Appreciate it. Thank you all so much for joining and getting in and spending the extra time in the CWPP session this afternoon. We will be back on. I think we're going to try a take 2 on our morning opening session tomorrow. Dan Gibbs did say he's available to join us again tomorrow, so we'll still get his welcome in the morning, as well as we got Grand Junction Honor Guard doing presentation of the colors. So we were sad we missed that, and we're going to pick up tomorrow at 9 o'clock with that. Exhibits will be open at 8:15, and as well as the meeting hub. So please, I look forward to seeing everybody back in the morning. And thanks for joining this strategy session this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great session.
And that's cool. Those of us, if you were just on air, you got kicked out. But those of us who actually got into the Zoom, we're all still stuck here together trying to figure out what to do with that.
Oh.
I think most folks have.
Hey, this is Abby. I'm still in the Zoom because I lost the other connection. Are we going to have access to those documents that you're posting tomorrow still, or not?
Yeah, so I will put them in the FACO booth tonight. I'll put the link to it in the FACO booth. And also it's shared, it's openly shared. So once you have that link, if you want to just save a bookmark to it or save it in your own notes, you can as well. So I won't be closing off editing access to it at all.
Cool, thank you. Hey, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else, since we are still in here, this apparently is after hours.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm still seeing 28 participants, Becca. I mean, I don't know. It looks like, yep, they're dropping.
Oh. I was thinking about trying to get an after hours session actually scheduled, but we've had so many problems. I'm disappointed the breakout groups didn't work to an extent, but I think we made it work anyhow. So
Yeah, good job. I mean, had you not had all that built out, otherwise, there's no way it would have been nearly as successful, I'm sure, but it is what it is. You live and you learn. I mean, geez, I think all told, it's been pretty smooth. That, again, that's kind of generally an outward facing view, because like I said, I participated or just viewed most of the sessions that occurred today. So it's gone well in my mind.
great. All right.
Anything you need from us, Rebecca, or we'll see you tomorrow?
I think we're set. We just need to make sure those links work for our morning opening tomorrow. Thank you, Daniel. I'm really glad that you didn't end up having to be in that ONG meeting today. I think it really was great to have you live, and I'm sure for you to be able to see and hear what was going on in the session too. So.
Yeah. And it's me too. This is a lot more engaging than those commonly are. I haven't done one of those remotely, but this was a lot more interactive, I know. And yeah, there were a lot more things that we could have discussed and shared, but I think that was a good way to spend an hour and a half. And I know that in the end it'll be productive. And I know you're probably pretty exhausted right now, so let's just decide at another time how we'll filter through all of this input that we've gotten. Thanks again for getting me the prompt for the layout and everything. It's really been helpful, and this is, I think we're pretty well equipped to move forward from here.
Cool, good. Yeah, I hope it'll make for a good winter project at some point.
Yeah. No, I feel pretty confident of that. So yeah, it's great. I mean, it's sometimes the first steps are the hardest, but it's really helpful. So thank you very much for coming up with the idea and putting all the work in for it.
No, thank you.
You bet.
Yeah.
Okay, get some rest when the time comes.
All right. I get to go do an interview for my campaign. I've got somebody coming from the local news station in about 25 minutes.
Oh, gotcha. Well, good luck. Give them hell, huh?
Yeah. Thanks. See ya.
All right, take care. You bet. Bye.